Welcome to my channel on the best of fantasy. Recently I was in a discussion with the wonderful Abby Salter about Neil Gaiman's American Gods, and in the course of our discussion Abby asked me, how many stars would you give the book? And I thought about my answer to that question, because actually I don't give stars, and that made me think, I've never actually talked about how I rate or analyze books for the channel before. And I thought maybe an explanation is due. The fact that I do not give stars, I do have reasons for that. Although I will say right from the beginning, this is not me saying that giving stars is bad or wrong in any way whatsoever. This is simply my personal choice, the way I like to analyze books, and so forth. So people who give stars, I am perfectly fine with star ratings and all that if that's what they like and that's what they get out of, that is something that people enjoy. I think looking at how many stars people give and giving stars and figuring that out. And some people have very elaborate explanations for what they consider to be a 3-star or a 4-star or a 3.5 or what have you. So there's a lot of that out there, and that is fine with me. I have no problem with it. But I decided from the beginning not to give stars, and I'm going to tell you why. And also I want to tell you what I do try to concentrate on when I analyze a book for the channel. So I'm going to begin by talking about my college education. And when I say college, or if here in the States, we mean the same thing that people in the UK might mean by university. So my bachelor's degree. I went to a college with no grades, no exams of any sort, in fact. Very interesting place. If you want to look it up, it's called the Evergreen State College. It's in Washington State, near Olympia. I loved it there. It was fantastic. Now, we had no grades and no exams, but we did have evaluations, and that is important. So let me describe what we did there, as opposed to grading, as in A, B, C, that sort of thing, or you could have numbers or whatever, what have you. So the philosophy there is that this letter or number that is given to a student, a B, for example, what does that actually say about the student? What details does that give about what a student has learned, what a student has brought from the course? What changes has a student undergone while learning the material? How much effort did the student put in? Really, it says almost nothing about all those things. So the numbers and the grades that we assign to students at most colleges and institutions serve very little educational purpose. In fact, one could argue that such letters and numbers promote what I call, and many others call, bulimic learning. In other words, if you're just trying to get an A and you're being given an exam and you're just loading that information inside yourself and then you are disgorging it on the exam, that's not, in most cases, going to be transformative learning. That is not going to lead to you changing your perspective. In very few cases will it be as deep an experience as engaging in learning for its own sake. So there's the difference, learning for a grade versus learning for its own sake. And where I was at Evergreen, I was learning because I wanted to learn. I was taking classes that I was interested in because I wanted to learn the material. I wasn't thinking ever about the grade, and I found that incredibly liberating. Now, we were given evaluations. The professor at the end of the semester would write pages about our performance, what we did well, what we learned, and so forth. And we would do self-evaluations where we would do much the same. We would describe what we learned, what was our experience that semester, how did it change us? Again, reflecting on what you learn is a great way to reinforce what you've learned. So I found that experience so enriching and, as I said, liberating, and I loved it. And now, fast forward, here I am a professor working at an institution like most others where there are grades. And I still feel very much that the grades can get in the way of deeper, more interesting types of learning, unfortunately. But this is the world that we live in. So I'm mentioning all this because I think it's relevant to the idea of giving stars or numbers to books as well. So what am I interested when I'm analyzing a book? What am I interested when I am watching someone else's analysis of a book? Am I interested really in the number that they give it? That they give it a 3.5 out of 5 stars? Not so much, to be honest with you. That part to me is, I mean, I know that some people like to hear that number or to render it, but for me, it doesn't, again, it's just like with the grade. So how much does it actually say about the book? What does 3 stars mean? And I know that some people attempt to explain what their stars mean, but the fact is there are so many different books with so many different emphases that it can be a difficult thing for these numbers or stars or letters or whatever to actually have meaning, to have any kind of deeper meaning. So it's shorthand, just like with grades. So grades are shorthand for parents probably who are paying all that money to the institution. They want to know that their kid is doing fine, and they don't want to read an in-depth evaluation of any sort. On the other hand, it might be useful for institutions if you're going to go to graduate school or transfer somewhere, and they want to know what your GPA is, and that's just an easy, mindless way to know how well did this person do. But really, how well did the person do? Can't you tell that from the letter or the number? So same thing with a book. How much does that 3.5 or 4 say about the book? And personally, I don't feel it says a whole lot. So it can be fun. It can be a fun thing to compare what I gave a book as opposed to someone else. But in the end, how much do I get from knowing what number of stars someone else has assigned to a book? Okay, so it's shorthand. It maybe is useful in a quick way, but on a deeper level, I'm more interested in what the person has to say as a result of analyzing the book. And in particular, for me, the most important thing to discuss is theme. It's not the only thing to discuss, but it is the thing that unites all of the other elements of a story to me. And every story has a theme. Themes can be as simple as a moral of the story, or it can be as complex as having actually several themes that are applicable to many different situations but have a sort of universal resonance. So what is a theme, after all? It's not the easiest thing to define, in fact. One of those things where you know it when you see it, but a theme, I think it's useful to contrast it with a summary, a plot summary. So if I'm going to, for example, summarize a book like The Hobbit, right? I would simply mention the most pertinent facts along the way, such as The Hobbit portrays a hobbit named Bilbo Baggins who is compelled out of his comfortable home to go on an adventure with 13 dwarves and a wizard in order to retrieve their long-lost treasure from a dragon that has seized it. And along the way, I can even elaborate a little bit for this plot summary. Along the way, the Hobbit has adventures involving trolls and goblins and encounters with little beasties under mountains and elves and so on. So you get the idea. It's a plot summary. If I'm talking about theme, on the other hand, what is the theme of The Hobbit? Then I'm going to talk about something else, something a little bit deeper, I think. What insights does the story give us? J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit portrays a hero's journey in which Bilbo Baggins learns a lot about courage and about and a deep lesson in morality and responsibility as a result of leaving his womb-like home and being forced to make difficult decisions out in the wilderness, that sort of thing. So you see what the difference, though, what I'm emphasizing there? I'm emphasizing what did Bilbo learn on his journey, right? How was he transformed during his journey? There's a certain kind of universality to this. There is a resonance that we get from what Bilbo has gone through that speaks to us, that speaks to our experience, that speaks to human experience. And so for me, that is what is far more interesting than just my mere summary of The Hobbit. It's much more interesting to get inside the pages, as it were, and discuss, okay, what are some of the deeper things going on here? And so that is one of the things that I like to talk about. So you could consider that the equivalent of, my college having the professor write pages about me and me writing pages about myself as a self-evaluation. Talking about themes is the equivalent of doing that. It's doing a deeper analysis, a deeper evaluation of what actually has happened here, what transformative things have gone on. So for me, that's the heart of it. But there are many other elements of the story to talk about. And every story has themes of some sort or other. Some have more. Some delve a bit deeper. Some are more purposeful in presenting the themes. But all the other elements relate back to theme in some way or other. For example, characters. People like to talk about characters. And many people describe themselves as character-driven readers. And that's great. That's wonderful. I mean, I love vivid characters myself. Some of my favorite authors in the fantasy genre are really great character writers. But characters are usually related to the theme as well, in many respects. So when we talk about characters, we can talk about whether a character is flat or round. And usually it's really somewhere on a continuum there, isn't it? Round characters being more psychologically developed. They feel three-dimensional. They feel real, like people you can meet and talk to and shake hands with and get to know. Whereas flat characters tend to be more symbolic and one-dimensional. There is a single dominant trait in that character that is what that character kind of stands for. And they can be, by the way, every bit as vivid as a round character. Flat characters serve a purpose. But another dimension, if you will, of characters that we can talk about is whether they're static or dynamic. And static meaning the character doesn't change in the course of the story. Dynamic being a character changes in the course of the story. So if you look at Bilbo Baggins, how does he change in the course of The Hobbit? Well, he grows up, he matures, he is forced to confront his own fears. He is forced to find courage within himself. He is, in the end, the big moral decision that he makes is the biggest indication of the changes that he has undergone. And he is far more receptive to having adventures. So he is definitely a dynamic character in The Hobbit. And that is a wonderful thing because it goes back to the theme. You can see how Bilbo's dynamism, his changes, relate directly to the theme of the story. And the same thing for characters who often have these changes, have some kind of an epiphany, some kind of revelation. And again, that goes back to the theme. What is Bilbo's revelation when he withholds the Arkenstone from Thorin and gives it instead to the elves and the humans who are trying to negotiate with the dwarves? Well, his epiphany, his revelation is many things, but there's loyalty. There's doing what's right no matter the cost, right? So there are some very important things that Bilbo learns here. And again, it goes right to the heart of the theme of The Hobbit. So what changes does a character undergo? And what revelations or epiphanies does a character experience? And I think you're on your path to discussing the theme there. If you talk about setting also can relate to the theme. Middle-earth is a beautiful place, a place of wonder, a place of, well, outside the Shire where it's comfortable and womb-like, there is the wild, there is adventure, right? So the very setting actually reinforces once again the theme of growing up, going on the hero's journey. So that is another aspect of the book that you can talk about. There is great beauty and peril out there. And so there are many aspects besides characters and setting as well. There are symbols. The ring in The Hobbit that later takes on much more symbolic resonance, of course, but in The Lord of the Rings. But the ring is a very potent symbol in Middle-earth, isn't it? A symbol of power, the seduction of power, what power does to people. And we can see the beginnings of it in Bilbo's becoming a bit more sly and cunning after finding the ring. And it also becomes entwined with this theme of compassion, that Bilbo spares Gollum's life, right? As a result of this decision a lot of repercussions along the road happen. So a very big thing once again. So symbols, very important to talk about symbols, especially as they relate to themes. Often symbols can have more than one meaning, but they almost always go back to the theme or themes of the story. What else can you talk about there? Well, the title is often important. The Hobbit tells us that this is a story about a hobbit and this hobbit's journey. So again, we can even take in this case, something as simple as the title, the subtitle being There and Back Again. Haha, hero's journey again. There and back again. It's about the hero going out on a transformative quest and eventually returning home a different person, a more moral person, a more responsible, more capable person. And that transformation is what the story is all about. So the title tells us a lot. So you can talk about the title. You can talk about the narrative perspective. Once again, I think it's very important, and it goes back to the theme. We can talk about whether the story is first person, for example, and if it's first person, is it a major character or a minor character? Or is the story told in third person? And if it's told in third person, is the perspective omniscient? Is it an omniscient narrator who sees into the minds of all the characters? Or is it a limited omniscient narrator, which is more common these days, who sees mainly into the mind of a perspective or POV character? Or is it an objective narrator who sees into the minds of no characters and simply reports things as they happen? And this is important. The narrative perspective in The Hobbit, once again, has an impact on the way we experience the story. The narrator is obviously much more playful, and sometimes will even talk directly to the reader, give us a little wink and that sort of thing. That has an influence on the way we experience the story as a more lighthearted story than, say, Lord of the Rings, or certainly the Silmarillion. And that's important too, because yes, Tolkien did write this story with children in mind, but it is also a story that adults enjoy very much. So it is something that you can talk about, the fact that he has a narrator who is sort of winking at us and speaking to us as if we were at a slightly younger age, but that is part of the enjoyment as well. And it helps us to identify with Bilbo, who is in fact middle-aged, but we can see him, being a small hobbit, as also being very childlike. And that again goes back to the hero's journey of growing up, maturing, that sort of thing. So all these these elements and more, you can talk about the tone, and you can talk about the style, and you can talk about all these things. But for me, it always goes back to the theme. And so that is what I like to talk about when I analyze a book. And for me, that is way more interesting than whether the book is a 4 or a 5. Although in the case of The Hobbit, of course, I would have to give it a 5. But why, right? So, is it because of nostalgia? Is it because I feel that it conveys these themes so nicely and in a way that I find very effective, and in a way that I am very affectionate toward because of my own personal history with this story? I just think that when you say 5 or 4 or whatever, it's not as interesting as why. What does the book say to you? How does it speak to you? What is it about, right? What are its themes? So for me, that's what I like to talk about when I review a book. And I think most of the time people can tell when I review a book whether I enjoyed the book or not. And that, by the way, is also relevant. I think there is a place for expressing one's enjoyment in a review. There is nothing wrong with that whatsoever. And if the easiest way for you to do that is to give it a star, 3 stars or 4 stars or whatever, then there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But I think people can tell when I review a book how much I enjoy it, whether or not I enjoy it, and what aspects of it I enjoy, because by analyzing the theme and all those other elements of the story, I can express in a more subtle way what aspects of the book I enjoyed, what I didn't, where I thought its strengths were. Once again, going back to the idea of that written evaluation of me as a student, way back at the Evergreen State College, my professor can say, give a much more interesting and compelling narrative of what I learned. And the same thing when you're talking about the themes. You can talk about what you learned. So that's my take, at least. I hope you've enjoyed my thoughts on this. A bit of a ramble here on my part, but it was something I thought that I probably should address at some point, since I'm reviewing all these books on the channel all the time, so you can know where I'm coming from when I'm doing that. I hope you enjoyed my thoughts, and I'd love to hear what you think about rating books and analyzing them and sharing our joy for them and discussing them and so forth. And if you do give stars, and you tell me why. I'm very happy to learn about that from other people as well. So thanks very much for listening to all of this, and until next time.